This is IBM Museum. I'm off camera for this video as well. Hello. And this is the start of the series for the Gotek diskette drive replacements that are out for replacing the non-functional diskette drives on all sorts of equipment, computers and otherwise, including the IBM PS2s. And it's very relevant in this case because we can have these diskette drives on our PS2s that they just stop functioning. They need the caps replaced or whatever else. And the Gotek is a good solution to go through and replace the diskette drive on the system. And in this case, I have the texELEC wiring harness that's on the back of this. I'll provide a link to this as well. And that's just a mechanism to connect up the Gotek to the different interface of the IBM PS2. In another video, I have my external diskette connections and adapters and drive off to the side here for going through part of another series as well and showing how the external diskette drive connections are on IBM PS2s. And I'll also have the occasion to where I'll go over those internal connections as well for the diskette drives. Now, in this instance, this Gotek I have is fresh out of the box. It's got the default jumpers in place. Since that texELEC adapter is available by mail order, there's no configuration to it, just a matter of connecting it up. Putting it into the PS2, there's really nothing much to set up. I mean, there's a knowledge on how to run the Gotek that has to be learned, but the matter of connecting it, getting it set up, there's just nothing to it. I want to mainly go over the concept that it's going to be how we get the files or that image onto this USB thumb drive for use in the Gotek. That's going to be the larger aspect of these Gotek replacement drives. Now, in this case, I have a perfectly functioning floppy drive in the A drive position here. It's got the bay adapter over here. We'll cover that in some of the video series for the external diskette drives. And then this is the ribbon cable going over the top for that bay adapter going to the passive card here. And I have a Model 70 and 80 reference diskette. I've transferred the image on the system that I have a diskette drive on. So this is just as this diskette would have come from IBM. And it's relevant here, or the issue I want to discuss is that IBM set up these reference diskettes. In this case, it's shared between the Model 70 and 80 based on the system files and also the adapters that they normally expected to be on the system. So that's all that has. In this case, is those a limited set of adapter description files for how these systems conventionally had. And of course, with like the Model 80, it would have the specific memory adapters that were commonly found on those Model 80s. So those with the little 3 daughter cards that were on that main adapter that I showed on some of the prior videos. Now, in this case, it just has this passive diskette adapter, and I've got one of those to kind of show a side view, that there's no ADF to this. All it does is it gets power from that microchannel bus connection, and it's just a mechanism of passing through from that bay adapter cable to an external connection to be able to run the 4869 diskette drive that I've got off to the side here, and only the 360 KB version, since that doesn't have really any intelligent electronics or anything to it. It's just taking the signals, and it's only able to run with those signals to have that 4869 drive in the 360 KB version. And so I've got the plot line here is I've lost the configuration on this system. I've gone through and I've got a fresh Panasonic battery that I got off of Amazon. And I've replaced that old drained battery that was on the system before. I have the reference diskette in the drive. We're going to go through and we're going to power the system on, and it should go through and start up the reference diskette and take us through the steps to go through and configure the system. And this will count up to the 8 megabyte of RAM. These are the RAM modules that I modified on an earlier video of the presence detector PD bits of those SIMs to modify that memory for how the system wanted or what SIMs it was able to support. Okay, we've got the standard 161 and 163 errors. It's going through and booting to the diskette since that's already in the drive. For this level, you don't have to you don't have to press the F1 key if the diskette, that reference diskette, is already in the drive. Okay, we're going to press enter here. Okay, may need to have the battery replaced. We understand that. We just put a fresh battery in there. We're going to press the enter key. I'm using the cough button on my headset here. At least I can block out the, if I go through a coughing fit, like I had with an earlier video, I have the ability to bypass that happening to me now. This may still be a warts and all okay. Press enter. And we're leaving the reference diskette in here. We're just going through the thought of replacing the battery. Tells us to go through and set the date and time. Okay, time and date have been updated on your computer. We're going to F3. Way back on out. And this time we shouldn't get any particular errors, even though we're leaving the reference diskette in the drive. And I'll go through and install the Gotek adapter in just a moment here. And kind of give the plot line for it. So if we had the reference diskette out of the system and that hard drive is fully set up to boot from it, I don't want to go through all that delay and everything else of that hard drive booting up, but it is a perfectly functional drive. The system is configured at this point. It didn't give any errors on our startup. We could go through and we could view the configuration. Okay, and let's just view the configuration. Okay, I'm mainly interested in these slots. And like I say, for the slot 1 position, and that's the most outboard of the adapters on the Model 70 to the left. And that's got that dual async adapter. And that's a adapter for serial communications. I mean, maybe an external modem back in the day, or who knows what, a console to a managed switch, serial interface to be able to configure that device. But it's a relatively standard adapter in the IBM world, and that's why they included the ADF for that particular adapter on the reference disk for the Model 70 and Model 80. IBM was expecting that there was going to be a lot of occasions to where that dual async adapter would be in place. Now in slot 4, we have slot 2 and slot 3 empty for now, but slot 4, and that's actually put up over this riser, and it's actually for the hard drive interface, that DBA ESDI drive. And DBA just means direct bus attachment. And it's a drive that's proprietary to IBM's, but it's on the ESDI standard. And that was a big part of a lot of PS2 models. The 55SX that we viewed, that has that hard drive connection at the top of the riser. The Model 50Z, of course, the Model 70 as it is here. The Model 80 did not have that connection, but for the aspect of this being a reference diskette for both the 70 and 80, they put the files on there for each type of system as well. In other words, the DBA ESDI drive was there for the Model 70 as a default hard drive of that system. For like the Model 80, they would have that memory adapter that was commonly found on Model 80s with the 3 daughter cards that went on the base adapter that we saw in a prior video. It would have the ADF and initialization files for that adapter as well on the reference diskette. And the reference diskette, of course, has limited room. It's got only 1.44 megabytes, and so there's only so many ADFs that you can put on there. Even if they are a rather standard adapter that's out there, in some cases, those adapters might have an option diskette of their own, but could be to where all that's needed to run the adapter is that ADF, or at least to configure it on the system. And so we're going to go through and just go to the point where we're going to have the system restart. I'm going to go through and power it down, because this is the point that I'm going to go through and install the Gotek adapter. And I'll do it live just to go through and show. And all we are is we're getting it in place of this functional diskette drive. And I'm going to go through on the plot line for this series. Okay. And we'll go underneath this ribbon cable. And that's part of my plot line. Is on the small 70, I've gone through, and I'm tired of this bay adapter being in place that getting in the way of having this ribbon cable mess here that's on top. And so I want to go through and I want to replace this with another adapter. I'll show that in a moment. Now, when we talk about ribbon cable and how this even hangs from this texELEC ribbon cable and the wiring and things like that to this Gotek adapter, I came up with this concept as well, and I'm going to go a little bit further with that in the future. And that's in this case, it's a Model 80 sled that's on the bottom of that. That they had the diskette drives that went in basically straight horizontally, didn't have any angle to them on the system. But I've come up with this, and I want to develop a board that's back here, just like the texELEC, that uses a portion of that instead of this bay adapter circuitry piece, that it has that Gotek as a whole self-contained assembly that doesn't have this this long ribbon cable, and just a way of even maybe making the Gotek replacement drive a little bit more modular, that I can quickly put this in a system like the Model 70 or 80. As I was going through and on the previous video showing, of course, how we got those diskette drives out of the Model 80. And this is for the Model 70, something maybe more like this sort of adapter, even though in just taking these solder pins, I probably have a defunct drive that I'll go through and I can pull that off of that plastic piece. I'm not up to the point where with like a 3D printer at my disposal to where I can make those parts yet, but I plan that for the future as well. And just a way of getting that in there in a better arrangement than this ribbon cable, and maybe making it a little bit more modular. Now for the sled of the Model 70, and this would also be for the Model 50 types, where the drive is a little bit angled up slightly on that sled. The sled does have the drive sled does have a little bit of a rise to it to put the diskette drive in a particular position. But I want to come up with an assembly like that fits the Gotek basically. So without a whole bunch more talking, like I say, I want to get to the point where I replace this under the plot line of this video, to replace this bay adapter and to get this passive adapter out of there. I have one of them here. They have a minimal amount of chips, and of course it didn't show up in the listing for the adapters when we went through and viewed the configuration, just because there's no ADF for this. All it is it's getting the power from the microchannel bus, and it's a way of taking that ribbon cable connection from the bay adapter and putting it to an external port out the back. And I do have my 4869 drive with that connection on the back here. And I'm going to go ahead for now, since it's I can go through and I can put the replacement in. And this is what IBM called the diskette adapter A. And it went through, and you're able to run the 1.2 megabyte 4869 drives externally, because this actually has a floppy diskette controller. Now, it's not set up as the B drive in this case on the system. There's a driver program that is set up and sets this adapter up to a next available drive letter that you can set up it's accessible from like DOS, and it does even have an internal connection. And I will cover these adapters a lot more in later videos in its own series, but this is a conventional pinout. In other words, i.e. a clone or like a Gotek adapter would have this connector and not really any proprietary IBM standard. This is set up in a common configuration, of course, would need a separate power connection for internal drive, like the Gotek has. And so commonly this was in systems, PS2 systems that had those external drive connections for an internal diskette drive as well. Additional one that either a 1.2 megabyte diskette drive that was rather conventional that went in one of the bay adapters of like the MUL 80, for example. But I'm going through and say that I have I just picked up a 4869-002 drive, that 1.2 megabyte drive for external drive. And I don't need this passive adapter anymore as well. I want to run from that diskette driver A. So I'm going to go through, I'll pull the back bracket of this middle slot. And let's go through, slide that down. And seat that in place. And we could go through and switch the connection and all that. And as I say, I'll leave that in there for now. But the thought is that we're going through and replacing the functionality of this bay adapter and passive the adapter that goes in the microchannel slot for just the power with this diskette driver A adapter here. So let's go ahead and power the system back on. Now in this case, you see the Gotek display, and it's got a selection by these buttons for whatever diskette image. And in this case, I have the MUL 70 and 80 reference diskette on that number 1 spot. And that's how you switch between the setup of all the different partitions on that USB drive, is by the selection of that having that LED panel and just selecting the number. And the thought is you have a little index, and as you see, we went through it, beeped, and it detected the configuration change, and launched us into the reference disk. So we're going to go through and press the enter key. Okay, in this case, I'm not going to automatically configure the system. It's sensing that I added that diskette adapter A. I'm just going to go ahead and select no to kind of show the areas that I'm looking at. We're going to look at the set configuration. We're going to go through and we're going to view we'll see what warnings. So the description file for the adapter in slot 2 was not found. So IBM didn't have that on that standard MUL 70, MUL 80 reference diskette image. They didn't or didn't foresee or that they had, this has some separate driver files, and so typically that would have had what's considered an option diskette, and you have its own image. And for having a conventional functional floppy diskette drive on the PS2, the thought is you had that option diskette, and you could go through and plug that in and be able to copy over the ADF into the reference diskette. So future use, you'd have that ADF would be on there. And IBM, like I said, for that limited capacity, they had to leave space on those reference diskettes as well for people to be able to copy over the ADF files that they needed in their configuration. We're going to go ahead and press enter here. Okay. Okay. Let's go ahead and actually press escape. I pressed enter. It was wanting me to put the files in there for the diskette adapter A. And let's go through and actually view the configuration. And we'll go through F8. And so slot 2, we see unrecognized adapter installed. We don't have any clue as far as which ADF we need. If we didn't know it prior to this as well. So there may even be a thought that we have to get some of those, a utility to be able to identify those. And just like I ran through on the one video of the ROM basic routine, to be able to show the ADFs for that I would need for various adapters. So that we need to have kind of an image that we put on that Gotek or can use and put on the USB drive for the purposes of the Gotek as well. And that's the aspect I wanted to bring up is so I went through on the system, on my host system that I used to create the reference diskette image on the thumb drive. I didn't have that image is all wrapped up, and so as I went through and just wrote the image to that drive and to that partition on the USB drive, that if I were to have just if I didn't have a Gotek on that host system, I was using like just a USB port on that system. And there's, as I say, there's utilities that are available out there, and we'll get into that later on in the series. I wouldn't have the ability to, well, I guess part of the utility, you can go through and you can add separate files, but I'm wanting to just show that after I write that image, unless I modify it to add the particular ADF that I needed or something like that, that may even require me to have a Gotek on a host system to be able to just transfer the images to that thumb drive. If I didn't have any other software, and we'll look at both aspects of a host system without a Gotek and one with, just a way of going through and being able to get the files onto that particular area of the USB drive for the Gotek adapter to use. Now, I'm actually going to go through and we're going to press F3, and even though we didn't really make any configuration changes, and so in this case, I actually want to press the button, and we're going to go to the 002 image that we have on here. And I do have that ADF on that. I could have gone through and actually written the image also to another area on the Gotek and switch to that and run the reference diskette image, and at the appropriate point that's asking for an option diskette, press and select the partition number that I had that option diskette image in. So these Goteks are nice and functional too, that you don't end up having to necessarily swap floppy diskettes anymore as well. But you have the ability, you could have a whole index for the amount of partitions that you can set up on these USB drives. And just in there on 003, we could have a reference diskette for the MUL 50 and 60. On 004, we have the reference diskette for the 55SX and 65SX. So it's a very functional thing that with a USB drive and just a little bit of preparation, we could actually have it set for all the PS2s that we have, and being able to switch through, just look at that chart, see where we had that, that in which partition of the USB drive that was stored, and switch over to it. So we've booted the same thing, the reference diskette for the MUL 70 and 80. And in this case, I'm going to press yes because I do have the ADF for this diskette adapter A on that image. And so it doesn't complain anymore that it can't find that ADF. Now, what we may have to do as well is, as I say, there's lots of adapter description files, those ADF files for the adapters. That's the only file that adapter really needs to be, at least for the system to configure it. So we may have to come up to a point where we wrap those adapter description files up in different images that we can transfer to sections of the USB drive and have like all the local area network adapter description files are on a being on a particular partition of the thumb drive. I'm going to go through and we'll start running through the routine of the hard drive booting up. This effectively is ejecting the diskette as it is, pulling it out, even though we kind of have the numbers, and that really doesn't matter anymore. And we even have that activity LED that kind of flashes on just like a normal diskette drive would have if it were attached to the system. Okay, what is it complaining about now? I'll have to see. And it might be, again, one of those warts and all videos that just when I think, oh, and then it went through and it booted. It didn't recognize maybe me getting the Gotek back in there, and it's booting from the hard drive. And so once it goes through and I get a DOS prompt, I might go through (163). I can't remember what that was. I may have to see why. Okay. And maybe when configuring PS2s, it's wise just to leave that reference diskette in there and go through the amount of boots for configuring the system, saying the time and date. And just finally, when you don't get any errors on that last run, is the time where you go through and could consider taking the reference diskette or that USB drive out in this case. Okay, let's do a Control-Delete just to see if we get any errors on the next boot up. We do have the USB thumb drive back in there. Okay, and we got the beep. As I say, I don't really know why it went through. Let's see if we get any. No, it's perfectly fine. And we can use this opportunity to set configuration. And even though it ran the automatic configuration, let's go through in this case. Okay, and let's view that configuration. F8. Okay, so there's the slot 2, 5 1/4 inch diskette drive adapter, and just the DMA arbitration levels as level 3 is the only real setting to that adapter. And so we didn't have any errors for that. I'm going to go through, and since my point is that we had the ADF for that in this second partition that's on the USB drive, and that's the reason we were able to set up that adapter, or had to be aware to go through that process. Okay, and we're going to press enter. I'm going to go through and I'm going to effectively eject the USB drive. and we'll have to go through that boot up process of the hard drive. But I can go through from there and wrap up the video of this being that introduction to the Gotek diskette drive replacements on PS2s. And once now that we have those concepts down, why is it when I 162. Okay. Okay. And this switches to the partitions, the single count. Let's go back to that first partition. Press F1. And putting from the hard drive again. Huh. Okay. And I thought I had a video wrapped up here. I don't know why it's complaining about the 162, or maybe it just doesn't see. I don't know if there's something to the configuration of that diskette adapter A. And it may cut away from the video just to kind of figure out and resolve, and then come back after I've figured out what this little hiccup is to introduce the word on this video. But otherwise, I'm going to give my sign off, even though I may have the outtake at the end and showing what I discover for configuring the system, or what it's complaining about with the 162 error here. So this is IBM Museum. That's all I have for now. If you like this video, like this content, go ahead and click on the like button. But as always, this is IBM Museum. Thank you. So this is the outtake. The 162 error is after booting from the hard file. Problem isolation aids. This problem may be caused by software drivers invoked while booting from the fixed disk. This is usually caused by a device driver being loaded without the appropriate hardware attached and functioning. So that may even be flagging on that I don't have a diskette drive connected to the external port, or something else that it thinks it needs. And I still left that passive adapter in there as well, and I had the 4869 connected to it. And as you can see, that 4869 drive, it's got a power connection to it, but it's powered off. And I guess I could go through and try a sequence to see with it powered up and everything else, if that functions as a system it specs as well. But that's it for the outtake. I've discovered what that error means, and I may go through a little bit more further troubleshooting. But the error is kind of extraneous to the plot line otherwise. But I guess it shows that, to have a system close by to be able to look up those errors quickly if you're not familiar with some of the numerical errors that can come up and display. And then once you don't have any more errors showing, then you can finally eject that reference diskette, or pull that USB thumb drive out if you've got one of these Gotek adapters. We'll go through further on this series to showing how we get image files onto those USB drives, and and the aspects of whether we have a Gotek on a host system or not, or whether we just maybe have USB ports. But that's all I have for now. Thank you. Okay, a second and final outtake is that once I went through and connected up that 4869 drive to the diskette adapter A, that external connection, the system booted up and absolutely no errors at all. I didn't have to go through any configuration or anything like that. So it's important to understand what those numerical errors mean and to kind of read through them and how the descriptive it is to or invaluable it can be to diagnosing the error that you're experiencing with the PS2s. And I'll may have some video at some later point that I go over as a reference of where to find those errors, or I can include it in the description of this video or a later video. But all this good material, as I say, normally these videos that you'll get from me with the diverse content like this is warts and all. It's an aspect that as I go through and I try and plot out the videos of what may happen, but it's good to get thrown a curve on video and for going through it and just diagnosing a little bit more trouble. And that is a learning experience for everyone, me included. So this is IBM Museum. Thank you.